Wuthering Heights by Emily Brontë. Chapter 21. We had sad work with little Cathy that day. She rose in high glee, eager to join her cousin, and such passionate tears and lamentations followed the news of his departure, that Edgar himself was obliged to soothe her, by affirming he should come back soon. He added, however, "if I can get him," and there were no hopes of that. This promise poorly pacified her; but time was more potent, and though still at intervals she inquired of her father when Linton would return, before she did see him again his features had waxed so dim in her memory that she did not recognise him. When I chanced to encounter the housekeeper of Wuthering Heights in paying business visits to Gimmerton, I used to ask how the young master got on, for he lived almost as secluded as Catherine herself, and was never to be seen. I could gather from her that he continued in weak health, and was a tiresome inmate. She said Mr. Heathcliff seemed to dislike him ever longer and worse, though he took some trouble to conceal it. He had an antipathy to the sound of his voice, and could not do at all with his sitting in the same room with him many minutes together. There seldom passed much talk between them. Linton learnt his lessons and spent his evenings in a small apartment they called the parlour, or else lay in bed all day, for he was constantly getting coughs and colds and aches and pains of some sort. "And I never know such a faint-hearted creature," added the woman. "No one so careful of hisseln. He will go on, if I leave the window open a bit late in the evening. Oh, it's killing a breath of night air! And he must have a fire in the middle of summer, and Joseph's bacca pipe is poison, and he must always have sweets and dainties, and always milk, milk for ever, heeding naught how the rest of us are pinched in winter. And there he'll sit wrapped in his furred cloak in his chair by the fire, with some toast and water or other slop on the hob to sip at. And if Hareton, for pity, comes to amuse him, Hareton is not bad-natured, though he's rough. They're sure to part, one swearing and the other crying. I believe the master would relish Earnshaw's thrashing him to a mummy, if he were not his son; and I'm certain he would be fit to turn him out of doors if he knew half the nursing he gives hisseln. But then he won't go into danger of temptation: he never enters the parlour; and should Linton show those ways in the house where he is, he sends him upstairs directly." I divined from this account that utter lack of sympathy had rendered young Heathcliff selfish and disagreeable, if he were not so originally, and my interest in him, consequently, decayed; though still I was moved with a sense of grief at his lot, and a wish that he had been left with us. Mr. Edgar encouraged me to gain information: he thought a great deal about him, I fancy, and would have run some risk to see him; and he told me once to ask the housekeeper whether he ever came into the village. She said he had only been twice, on horseback, accompanying his father, and both times he pretended to be quite knocked up for 3 or 4 days afterwards. That housekeeper left, if I recollect rightly, 2 years after he came; and another, whom I did not know, was her successor. She lives there still. Time wore on at the Grange in its former pleasant way till Miss Cathy reached 16. On the anniversary of her birth we never manifested any signs of rejoicing, because it was also the anniversary of my late mistress's death. Her father invariably spent that day alone in the library, and walked at dusk as far as Gimmerton kirkyard, where he would frequently prolong his stay beyond midnight. Therefore Catherine was thrown on her own resources for amusement. This 20th of March was a beautiful spring day, and when her father had retired, my young lady came down dressed for going out, and said she asked to have a ramble on the edge of the moor with me. Mr. Linton had given her leave if we went only a short distance, and were back within the hour. "So make haste, Ellen!" she cried. "I know where I wish to go, where a colony of moor game has settled. I want to see whether they have made their nests yet." "That must be a good distance up," I answered. "They don't breed on the edge of the moor." "No, it's not," she said. "I've gone very near with papa." I put on my bonnet and sallied out, thinking nothing more of the matter. She bounded before me, and returned to my side, and was off again like a young greyhound. And at first I found plenty of entertainment in listening to the larks singing far and near, and enjoying the sweet warm sunshine, and watching her, my pet and my delight, with her golden ringlets flying loose behind, and her bright cheek as soft and pure in its bloom as a wild rose, and her eyes radiant with cloudless pleasure. She was a happy creature, and an angel in those days. It's a pity she could not be content. "Well," said I, "where are your moor game, Miss Cathy? We should be at them. The Grange Park fence is a great way off now." "Oh, a little further, only a little further, Ellen," was her answer continually. "Climb to that hillock, past that bank, and by the time you reach the other side I shall have raised the birds." But there were so many hillocks and banks to climb and pass, that at length I began to be weary, and told her we must halt and retrace our steps. I shouted to her, as she had outstripped me a long way. She either did not hear or did not regard, for she still sprang on, and I was compelled to follow. Finally she dived into a hollow, and before I came in sight of her again, she was 2 miles nearer Wuthering Heights than her own home, and I beheld a couple of persons arrest her, one of whom I felt convinced was Mr. Heathcliff himself. Cathy had been caught in the fact of plundering, or at least hunting out the nests of the grouse. The Heights were Heathcliff's land, and he was reproving the poacher. "I've neither taken any nor found any," she said, as I toiled to them, expanding her hands in corroboration of the statement. "I didn't mean to take them, but papa told me there were quantities up here, and I wished to see the eggs." Heathcliff glanced at me with an ill-meaning smile, expressing his acquaintance with the party, and consequently his malevolence towards it, and demanded who papa was. "Mr. Linton of Thrushcross Grange," she replied. "I thought you did not know me, or you wouldn't have spoken in that way."
"You suppose papa is highly esteemed and respected, then?"
he said sarcastically. "And what are you?" inquired Catherine, gazing curiously on the speaker. "That man I've seen before. Is he your son?" She pointed to Hareton, the other individual, who had gained nothing but increased bulk and strength by the addition of 2 years to his age. He seemed as awkward and rough as ever. "Miss Cathy," I interrupted, "it will be 3 hours instead of 1 that we are out presently. We really must go back."
"No, that man is not my son,"
answered Heathcliff, pushing me aside.
"but I have one, and you have seen him before, too. And though your nurse is in a hurry, I think both you and she would be the better for a little rest. Will you just turn this nab of heath and walk into my house? You'll get home earlier for the ease, and you shall receive a kind welcome."
I whispered Catherine that she mustn't on any account accede to the proposal. It was entirely out of the question. "Why?" she asked aloud. "I'm tired of running, and the ground is dewy. I can't sit here. Let us go, Ellen. Besides, he says I have seen his son. He's mistaken, I think, but I guess where he lives: at the farmhouse I visited in coming from Penistone Crags. Don't you?"
"I do. Come, Nelly, hold your tongue. It will be a treat for her to look in on us. Hareton, get forwards with the lass. You shall walk with me, Nelly."
"No, she's not going to any such place!" I cried, struggling to release my arm, which he had seized. But she was almost at the door-stones already, scampering round the brow at full speed. Her appointed companion did not pretend to escort her: he shied off by the roadside and vanished. "Mr. Heathcliff, it's very wrong," I continued. "You know you mean no good. And there she'll see Linton, and all will be told as soon as ever we return, and I shall have the blame."
"I want her to see Linton,"
he answered.
"He's looking better these few days. It's not often he's fit to be seen. And we'll soon persuade her to keep the visit secret. Where is the harm of it?"
"The harm of it is, that her father would hate me if he found I suffered her to enter your house; and I am convinced you have a bad design in encouraging her to do so," I replied.
"My design is as honest as possible. I'll inform you of its whole scope," he said. "That the two cousins may fall in love and get married. I'm acting generously to your master: his young chit has no expectations; and should she second my wishes, she'll be provided for at once as joint successor with Linton."
"If Linton died," I answered, "and his life is quite uncertain, Catherine would be the heir."
"No, she would not,"
he said.
"There is no clause in the will to secure it so. His property would go to me; but to prevent disputes, I desire their union, and am resolved to bring it about."
"And I'm resolved she shall never approach your house with me again," I returned, as we reached the gate, where Miss Cathy waited our coming. Heathcliff bade me be quiet, and, preceding us up the path, hastened to open the door. My young lady gave him several looks, as if she could not exactly make up her mind what to think of him; but now he smiled when he met her eye, and softened his voice in addressing her, and I was foolish enough to imagine the memory of her mother might disarm him from desiring her injury. Linton stood on the hearth. He had been out walking in the fields, for his cap was on, and he was calling to Joseph to bring him dry shoes. He had grown tall of his age, still wanting some months of 16. His features were pretty yet, and his eye and complexion brighter than I remembered them, though with merely temporary lustre borrowed from the salubrious air and genial sun.
"Now, who is that?"
asked Mr. Heathcliff, turning to Cathy.
"Can you tell?"
"Your son," she said, having doubtfully surveyed first one and then the other.
"Yes, yes," answered he. "But is this the only time you have beheld him? Think. Ah, you have a short memory. Linton, don't you recall your cousin that you used to tease us so with wishing to see?"
"What, Linton?" cried Cathy, kindling into joyful surprise at the name. "Is that little Linton? He's taller than I am. Are you Linton?" The youth stepped forward and acknowledged himself. She kissed him fervently, and they gazed with wonder at the change time had wrought in the appearance of each. Catherine had reached her full height; her figure was both plump and slender, elastic as steel, and her whole aspect sparkling with health and spirits. Linton's looks and movements were very languid, and his form extremely slight; but there was a grace in his manner that mitigated these defects, and rendered them not unpleasing. After exchanging numerous marks of fondness with him, his cousin went to Mr. Heathcliff, who lingered by the door, dividing his attention between the objects inside and those that lay without; pretending, that is, to observe the latter, and really noting the former alone. "And you are my uncle, then?" she cried, reaching up to salute him. I thought I liked you, though you were cross at first. Why don't you visit at the Grange with Linton? To live all these years such close neighbours and never see us is odd. What have you done so for?"
"I visited it once or twice too often before you were born,"
he answered.
"There, damn it! If you have any kisses to spare, give them to Linton. They're thrown away on me."
"Naughty Ellen!" exclaimed Catherine, flying to attack me next with her lavish caresses. "Wicked Ellen, to try to hinder me from entering! But I'll take this walk every morning in future, may I, uncle? And sometimes bring papa? Won't you be glad to see us?"
"Of course,"
replied the uncle, with a hardly suppressed grimace resulting from his deep aversion to both the proposed visitors.
"But stay,"
he continued, turning towards the young lady.
"now I think of it, I'd better tell you. Mr. Linton has a prejudice against me. We quarrelled at one time of our lives with unchristian ferocity; and if you mention coming here to him, he'll put a veto on your visits altogether. Therefore you must not mention it, unless you be careless of seeing your cousin hereafter. You may come, if you will, but you must not mention it."
"Why did you quarrel?" asked Catherine, considerably crestfallen.
"He thought me too poor to wed his sister,"
answered Heathcliff.
"and was grieved that I got her. His pride was hurt, and he'll never forgive it."
"That's wrong," said the young lady. "Some time I'll tell him so. But Linton and I have no share in your quarrel. I'll not come here, then. He shall come to the Grange." "It will be too far for me," murmured her cousin. "To walk 4 miles would kill me. No, come here, Miss Catherine, now and then. Not every morning, but once or twice a week." The father launched towards his son a glance of bitter contempt.
"I am afraid, Nelly, I shall lose my labour.
he muttered to me.
Miss Catherine, as the ninny calls her, will discover his value, and send him to the devil. Now, if it had been Hareton! Do you know that 20 times a day I covet Hareton, with all his degradation? I'd have loved the lad had he been some one else. But I think he's safe from her love. I'll pit him against that paltry creature, unless it bestir itself briskly. We calculate it will scarcely last till it is 18. Oh, confound the vapid thing! He's absorbed in drying his feet, and never looks at her. Linton!"
"Yes, father," answered the boy.
"Have you nothing to show your cousin anywhere about? Not even a rabbit or a weasel's nest? Take her into the garden before you change your shoes, and into the stable to see your horse."
"Wouldn't you rather sit here?" asked Linton, addressing Cathy in a tone which expressed reluctance to move again. "I don't know," she replied, casting a longing look to the door, and evidently eager to be active. He kept his seat, and shrank closer to the fire. Heathcliff rose and went into the kitchen, and from thence to the yard, calling out for Hareton. Hareton responded, and presently the two re-entered. The young man had been washing himself, as was visible by the glow on his cheeks and his wetted hair. "Oh, I'll ask you, uncle!" cried Miss Cathy, recollecting the housekeeper's assertion. "That is not my cousin, is he?"
"Yes,"
he replied.
"your mother's nephew. Don't you like him?"
Catherine looked queer.
"Is he not a handsome lad?"
he continued. The uncivil little thing stood on tiptoe, and whispered a sentence in Heathcliff's ear. He laughed. Hareton darkened. I perceived he was very sensitive to suspected slights, and had obviously a dim notion of his inferiority; but his master or guardian chased the frown by exclaiming— "You'll be the favourite among us, Hareton. She says you are a
What was it? Well, something very flattering. Here, you go with her round the farm, and behave like a gentleman, mind. Don't use any bad words, and don't stare when the young lady is not looking at you, and be ready to hide your face when she is. And when you speak, say your words slowly, and keep your hands out of your pockets. Be off, and entertain her as nicely as you can."
He watched the couple walking past the window. Earnshaw had his countenance completely averted from his companion. He seemed studying the familiar landscape with a stranger's and an artist's interest. Catherine took a sly look at him, expressing small admiration. She then turned her attention to seeking out objects of amusement for herself, and tripped merrily on, lilting a tune to supply the lack of conversation.
"I've tied his tongue,"
Observed Heathcliff.
"he'll not venture a single syllable all the time. Nelly, you recollect me at his age, nay, some years younger. Did I ever look so stupid, so gormless, as Joseph calls it?"
"Worse," I replied, "because more sullen with it,"
"I've a pleasure in him,"
he continued, reflecting aloud.
"he has satisfied my expectations. If he were a born fool, I should not enjoy it half so much. But he's no fool, and I can sympathise with all his feelings, having felt them myself. I know what he suffers now, for instance, exactly. It is merely a beginning of what he shall suffer, though. And he'll never be able to emerge from his bathos of coarseness and ignorance. I've got him faster than his scoundrel of a father secured me, and lower, for he takes a pride in his brutishness. I've taught him to scorn everything extra-animal as silly and weak. Don't you think Hindley would be proud of his son if he could see him? Almost as proud as I am of mine. But there's this difference. One is gold put to the use of paving stones, and the other is tin polished to ape a service of silver. Mine has nothing valuable about it, yet I shall have the merit of making it go as far as such poor stuff can go. His had first-rate qualities, and they are lost, rendered worse than unavailing. I have nothing to regret. He would have more than any but I are aware of. And the best of it is, Hareton is damnably fond of me. You'll own that I've outmatched Hindley there. If the dead villain could rise from his grave to abuse me for his offspring's wrongs, I should have the fun of seeing the said offspring fight him back again, indignant that he should dare to rail at the one friend he has in the world.
Heathcliff chuckled a fiendish laugh at the idea. I made no reply, because I saw that he expected none. Meantime, our young companion, who sat too removed from us to hear what was said, began to evince symptoms of uneasiness, probably repenting that he had denied himself the treat of Catherine's society for fear of a little fatigue. His father remarked the restless glances wandering to the window, and the hand irresolutely extended towards his cap.
"Get up, you idle boy!"
he exclaimed with assumed heartiness.
"Away after them! They're just at the corner by the stand of hives."
Linton gathered his energies and left the hearth. The lattice was open, and as he stepped out, I heard Cathy inquiring of her unsociable attendant what was that inscription over the door. Hareton stared up and scratched his head like a true clown. "It's some damnable writing," he answered. "I cannot read it." "Can't read it?" cried Catherine. "I can read it. It's English. But I want to know why it is there." Linton giggled, the first appearance of mirth he had exhibited. "He does not know his letters," he said to his cousin. "Could you believe in the existence of such a colossal dunce?" "Is he all he should be?" asked Miss Cathy, seriously. "Or is he simple, not right? I've questioned him twice now, and each time he looked so stupid I think he does not understand me. I can hardly understand him, I'm sure." Linton repeated his laugh, and glanced at Hareton tauntingly, who certainly did not seem quite clear of comprehension at that moment. "There's nothing the matter but laziness, is there, Earnshaw?" he said. "My cousin fancies you are an idiot. There you experience the consequence of scorning book-larning, as you would say. Have you noticed, Catherine, his frightful Yorkshire pronunciation?" "Why, where the devil is the use on't?" growled Hareton, more ready in answering his daily companion. He was about to enlarge further, but the two youngsters broke into a noisy fit of merriment, my giddy miss being delighted to discover that she might turn his strange talk to matter of amusement. "Where is the use of the devil in that sentence?" tittered Linton. "Papa told you not to say any bad words, and you can't open your mouth without one. Do try to behave like a gentleman, now do." "If thou weren't more a lass than a lad, I'd fell thee this minute, I would, pitiful lath of a cratur!" retorted the angry boor, retreating, while his face burnt with mingled rage and mortification, for he was conscious of being insulted, and embarrassed how to resent it. Mr. Heathcliff, having overheard the conversation as well as I, smiled when he saw him go, but immediately afterwards cast a look of singular aversion on the flippant pair, who remained chattering in the doorway, the boy finding animation enough while discussing Hareton's faults and deficiencies, and relating anecdotes of his goings-on, and the girl relishing his pert and spiteful sayings, without considering the ill nature they evinced. I began to dislike more than to compassionate Linton, and to excuse his father in some measure for holding him cheap. We stayed till afternoon. I could not tear Miss Cathy away sooner, but happily my master had not quitted his apartment, and remained ignorant of our prolonged absence. As we walked home, I would fain have enlightened my charge on the characters of the people we had quitted, but she got it into her head that I was prejudiced against them. "Aha!" she cried. "You take papa's side, Ellen. You are partial, I know, or else you wouldn't have cheated me so many years into the notion that Linton lived a long way from here. I'm really extremely angry, only I'm so pleased I can't show it. But you must hold your tongue about my uncle. He's my uncle, remember, and I'll scold papa for quarrelling with him." And so she ran on, till I relinquished the endeavour to convince her of her mistake. She did not mention the visit that night, because she did not see Mr. Linton. Next day it all came out, sadly to my chagrin. And still I was not altogether sorry. I thought the burden of directing and warning would be more efficiently borne by him than me. But he was too timid in giving satisfactory reasons for his wish that she should shun connection with the household of the Heights; and Catherine liked good reasons for every restraint that harassed her petted will. "Papa!" she exclaimed, after the morning's salutations, "guess whom I saw yesterday in my walk on the moors?" "Ah, papa, you started! You've not done right, have you now? I saw—but listen, and you shall hear how I found you out; and Ellen, who is in league with you, and yet pretended to pity me so, when I kept hoping, and was always disappointed, about Linton's coming back." She gave a faithful account of her excursion and its consequences; and my master, though he cast more than one reproachful look at me, said nothing till she had concluded. Then he drew her to him, and asked if she knew why he had concealed Linton's near neighbourhood from her. Could she think it was to deny her a pleasure that she might harmlessly enjoy? "It was because you disliked Mr. Heathcliff," she answered. "Then you believe I care more for my own feelings than yours, Cathy?" he said. "No, it was not because I disliked Mr. Heathcliff, but because Mr. Heathcliff dislikes me, and is a most diabolical man, delighting to wrong and ruin those he hates, if they give him the slightest opportunity. I knew that you could not keep up an acquaintance with your cousin without being brought into contact with him, and I knew he would detest you on my account. So, for your own good, and nothing else, I took precautions that you should not see Linton again. I meant to explain this some time as you grew older, and I'm sorry I delayed it." "But Mr. Heathcliff was quite cordial, papa," observed Catherine, not at all convinced. "And he didn't object to our seeing each other. He said I might come to his house when I pleased, only I must not tell you, because you had quarrelled with him, and would not forgive him for marrying Aunt Isabella. And you won't. You are the one to be blamed. He is willing to let us be friends at least, Linton and I, and you are not." My master, perceiving that she would not take his word for her uncle-in-law's evil disposition, gave a hasty sketch of his conduct to Isabella, and the manner in which Wuthering Heights became his property. He could not bear to discourse long upon the topic, for though he spoke little of it, he still felt the same horror and detestation of his ancient enemy that had occupied his heart ever since Mrs. Linton's death. "She might have been living yet, if it had not been for him," was his constant bitter reflection. And in his eyes Heathcliff seemed a murderer. Miss Cathy, conversant with no bad deeds except her own slight acts of disobedience, injustice, and passion, arising from hot temper and thoughtlessness, and repented of on the day they were committed, was amazed at the blackness of spirit that could brood on and cover revenge for years, and deliberately prosecute its plans without a visitation of remorse. She appeared so deeply impressed and shocked at this new view of human nature, excluded from all her studies and all her ideas till now, that Mr. Edgar deemed it unnecessary to pursue the subject. He merely added, "You will know hereafter, darling, why I wish you to avoid his house and family. Now return to your old employments and amusements, and think no more about them." Catherine kissed her father, and sat down quietly to her lessons for a couple of hours, according to custom. Then she accompanied him into the grounds, and the whole day passed as usual. But in the evening, when she had retired to her room, and I went to help her to undress, I found her crying, on her knees by the bedside. "Oh, fie, silly child!" I exclaimed. "If you had any real griefs, you'd be ashamed to waste a tear on this little contrariety. You never had one shadow of substantial sorrow, Miss Catherine. Suppose for a minute that master and I were dead, and you were by yourself in the world: how would you feel then? Compare the present occasion with such an affliction as that, and be thankful for the friends you have, instead of coveting more." "I'm not crying for myself, Ellen," she answered. "It's for him. He expected to see me again to-morrow, and there he'll be so disappointed, and he'll wait for me, and I shan't come." "Nonsense!" said I. "Do you imagine he has thought as much of you as you have of him? Hasn't he Hareton for a companion? Not 1 in 100 would weep at losing a relation they'd just seen twice for 2 afternoons. Linton will conjecture how it is, and trouble himself no further about you." "But may I not write a note to tell him why I cannot come?" she asked, rising to her feet. and just sent those books I promised to lend him. His books are not as nice as mine, and he wanted to have them extremely when I told him how interesting they were. May I not, Ellen?" "No, indeed! No, indeed!" replied I, with decision. "Then he would write to you, and there'd never be an end of it. No, Miss Catherine, the acquaintance must be dropped entirely. So papa expects, and I shall see that it is done." "But how can one little note—" she recommenced, putting on an imploring countenance. "Silence!" I interrupted. "We'll not begin with your little notes. Get into bed." She threw at me a very naughty look, so naughty that I would not kiss her good night at first. I covered her up and shut her door, in great displeasure; but, repenting half-way, I returned softly, and lo! there was Miss, standing at the table with a bit of blank paper before her and a pencil in her hand, which she guiltily slipped out of sight on my entrance. "You'll get nobody to take that, Catherine," I said, "if you write it. And at present I shall put out your candle." I set the extinguisher on the flame, receiving as I did so a slap on my hand, and a petulant "Cross thing!" I then quitted her again, and she drew the bolt in one of her worst, most peevish humours. The letter was finished, and forwarded to its destination by a milk fetcher who came from the village; but that I didn't learn till some time afterwards. Weeks passed on, and Cathy recovered her temper, though she grew wondrous fond of stealing off to corners by herself; and often, if I came near her suddenly while reading, she would start and bend over the book, evidently desirous to hide it; and I detected edges of loose paper sticking out beyond the leaves. She also got a trick of coming down early in the morning, and lingering about the kitchen, as if she were expecting the arrival of something; and she had a small drawer in a cabinet in the library, which she would trifle over for hours, and whose key she took special care to remove when she left it. One day, as she inspected this drawer, I observed that the playthings and trinkets which recently formed its contents were transmuted into bits of folded paper. My curiosity and suspicions were roused. I determined to take a peep at her mysterious treasures; so at night, as soon as she and my master were safe upstairs, I searched, and readily found among my house keys one that would fit the lock. Having opened, I emptied the whole contents into my apron, and took them with me to examine at leisure in my own chamber. Though I could not but suspect, I was still surprised to discover that they were a mass of correspondence, daily almost it must have been, from Linton Heathcliff; answers to documents forwarded by her. The earlier dated were embarrassed and short. Gradually, however, they expanded into copious love letters: foolish, as the age of the writer rendered natural, yet with touches here and there which I thought were borrowed from a more experienced source. Some of them struck me as singularly odd compounds of ardour and flatness, commencing in strong feeling, and concluding in the affected wordy style that a schoolboy might use to a fancied incorporeal sweetheart. Whether they satisfied Cathy I don't know, but they appeared very worthless trash to me. After turning over as many as I thought proper, I tied them in a handkerchief, and set them aside, re-locking the vacant drawer. Following her habit, my young lady descended early, and visited the kitchen. I watched her go to the door on the arrival of a certain little boy, and while the dairymaid filled his can, she tucked something into his jacket pocket, and plucked something out. I went round by the garden, and laid wait for the messenger, who fought valorously to defend his trust, and we spilt the milk between us. But I succeeded in abstracting the epistle, and threatening serious consequences if he did not look sharp home, I remained under the wall, and perused Miss Cathy's affectionate composition. It was more simple and more eloquent than her cousin's, very pretty and very silly. I shook my head, and went meditating into the house. The day being wet, she could not divert herself with rambling about the park; so, at the conclusion of her morning studies, she resorted to the solace of the drawer. Her father sat reading at the table, and I, on purpose, had sought a bit of work in some unripped fringes of the window curtain, keeping my eye steadily fixed on her proceedings. Never did any bird flying back to a plundered nest, which it had left brim-full of chirping young ones, express more complete despair in its anguished cries and flutterings than she by her single "Oh!" and the change that transfigured her late happy countenance. Mr. Linton looked up. "What is the matter, love? Have you hurt yourself?" he said. His tone and look assured her he had not been the discoverer of the hoard. "No, papa," she gasped. "Ellen, Ellen, come upstairs. I'm sick." I obeyed her summons, and accompanied her out. "Oh, Ellen, you have got them!" she commenced immediately, dropping on her knees, when we were enclosed alone. "Oh, give them to me, and I'll never, never do so again. Don't tell papa. You have not told papa, Ellen. Say you have not. I've been exceedingly naughty, but I won't do it any more." With a grave severity in my manner, I bade her stand up. "So," I exclaimed, "Miss Catherine, you are tolerably far on, it seems. You may well be ashamed of them. A fine bundle of trash you study in your leisure hours, to be sure. Why, it's good enough to be printed. And what do you suppose the master will think when I display it before him? I haven't shown it yet, but you needn't imagine I shall keep your ridiculous secrets. For shame! And you must have led the way in writing such absurdities. He would not have thought of beginning, I'm certain." "I didn't," sobbed Cathy, fit to break her heart. "I didn't once think of loving him to—" "Loving!" cried I, as scornfully as I could utter the word. "Loving! Did anybody ever hear the like? I might just as well talk of loving the miller who comes once a year to buy our corn. Pretty loving, indeed! And both times together you have seen Linton hardly 4 hours in your life. Now, here is the babyish trash. I'm going with it to the library, and we'll see what your father says to such loving." She sprang at her precious epistles, but I held them above my head, and then she poured out further frantic entreaties that I would burn them, do anything rather than show them. And being really fully as much inclined to laugh as scold, for I esteemed it all girlish vanity, I at length relented in a measure, and asked, "If I consent to burn them, will you promise faithfully neither to send nor receive a letter again, nor a book, for I perceive you have sent in books, nor locks of hair, nor rings, nor playthings?" "We don't send playthings," cried Catherine, her pride overcoming her shame. "Nor anything at all, then, my lady," I said. "Unless you will, here I go." "I promise, Ellen!" she cried, catching my dress. "Oh, put them in the fire, do, do!" But when I proceeded to open a place with the poker, the sacrifice was too painful to be borne. She earnestly supplicated that I would spare her 1 or 2. "1 or 2, Ellen! to keep for Linton's sake." I unknotted the handkerchief, and commenced dropping them in from an angle, and the flame curled up the chimney. "I will have one, you cruel wretch!" she screamed, darting her hand into the fire, and drawing forth some half-consumed fragments at the expense of her fingers. "Very well, and I will have some to exhibit to papa," I answered, shaking back the rest into the bundle, and turning anew to the door. She emptied her blackened pieces into the flames, and motioned me to finish the immolation. It was done. I stirred up the ashes, and interred them under a shovelful of coals; and she, mutely, and with a sense of intense injury, retired to her private apartment. I descended to tell my master that the young lady's qualm of sickness was almost gone, but I judged it best for her to lie down a while. She wouldn't dine, but she appeared at tea, pale and red about the eyes, and marvellously subdued in outward aspect. Next morning I answered the letter by a slip of paper inscribed, "Master Heathcliff is requested to send no more notes to Miss Linton, as she will not receive them." And henceforth the little boy came with vacant pockets. End of chapter 21. Chapter 22. Summer drew to an end, and early autumn. It was past Michaelmas, but the harvest was late that year, and a few of our fields were still uncleared. Mr. Linton and his daughter would frequently walk out among the reapers. At the carrying of the last sheaves they stayed till dusk, and the evening happening to be chill and damp, my master caught a bad cold that settled obstinately on his lungs, and confined him indoors throughout the whole of the winter, nearly without intermission. Poor Cathy, frightened from her little romance, had been considerably sadder and duller since its abandonment, and her father insisted on her reading less and taking more exercise. She had his companionship no longer. I esteemed it a duty to supply its lack, as much as possible, with mine: an inefficient substitute, for I could only spare 2 or 3 hours from my numerous diurnal occupations to follow her footsteps, and then my society was obviously less desirable than his. On an afternoon in October, or the beginning of November, a fresh, watery afternoon, when the turf and paths were rustling with moist, withered leaves, and the cold blue sky was half hidden by clouds, dark grey streamers rapidly mounting from the west and boding abundant rain, I requested my young lady to forego her ramble, because I was certain of showers. She refused, and I unwillingly donned a cloak and took my umbrella to accompany her on a stroll to the bottom of the park: a formal walk which she generally affected if low-spirited, and that she invariably was when Mr. Edgar had been worse than ordinary; a thing never known from his confession, but guessed both by her and me from his increased silence and the melancholy of his countenance. She went sadly on. There was no running or bounding now, though the chill wind might well have tempted her to race; and often, from the side of my eye, I could detect her raising a hand and brushing something off her cheek. I gazed round for a means of diverting her thoughts. On one side of the road rose a high, rough bank, where hazels and stunted oaks, with their roots half exposed, held uncertain tenure: the soil was too loose for the latter, and strong winds had blown some nearly horizontal. In summer Miss Catherine delighted to climb along these trunks, and sit in the branches swinging 20 feet above the ground; and I, pleased with her agility and her light childish heart, still considered it proper to scold every time I caught her at such an elevation, but so that she knew there was no necessity for descending. From dinner to tea she would lie in her breeze-rocked cradle, doing nothing except singing old songs, my nursery lore, to herself, or watching the birds, joint tenants, feed and entice their young ones to fly, or nestling with closed lids, half thinking, half dreaming, happier than words can express. "Look, miss!" I exclaimed, pointing to a nook under the roots of one twisted tree. "Winter is not here yet. There's a little flower up yonder, the last bud from the multitude of bluebells that clouded those turf steps in July with a lilac mist. Will you clamber up and pluck it to show to papa?" Cathy stared a long time at the lonely blossom trembling in its earthy shelter, and replied at length, "No, I'll not touch it. But it looks melancholy, does it not, Ellen?" "Yes," I observed, "about as starved and sookless as you. Your cheeks are bloodless. Let us take hold of hands and run. You're so low, I daresay I shall keep up with you." "No," she repeated, and continued sauntering on, pausing at intervals to muse over a bit of moss, or a tuft of blanched grass, or a fungus spreading its bright orange among the heaps of brown foliage; and ever and anon her hand was lifted to her averted face. "Catherine, why are you crying, love?" I asked, approaching and putting my arm over her shoulder. "You mustn't cry because papa has a cold. Be thankful it is nothing worse." She now put no further restraint on her tears: her breath was stifled by sobs. "Oh, it will be something worse," she said. "And what shall I do when papa and you leave me, and I am by myself? I can't forget your words, Ellen: they are always in my ear. How life will be changed, how dreary the world will be, when papa and you are dead!" "None can tell whether you won't die before us," I replied. "It's wrong to anticipate evil. We'll hope there are years and years to come before any of us go. Master is young, and I am strong and hardly 45. My mother lived till 80, a canty dame to the last. And suppose Mr. Linton was spared till he saw 60, that would be more years than you have counted, miss. And would it not be foolish to mourn a calamity above 20 years beforehand?" "But Aunt Isabella was younger than papa," she remarked, gazing up with timid hope to seek further consolation. "Aunt Isabella had not you and me to nurse her," I replied. "She wasn't as happy as master. She hadn't as much to live for. All you need do is to wait well on your father, and cheer him by letting him see you cheerful. And avoid giving him anxiety on any subject. Mind that, Cathy. I'll not disguise but you might kill him if you were wild and reckless, and cherished a foolish, fanciful affection for the son of a person who would be glad to have him in his grave, and allowed him to discover that you fretted over the separation he has judged it expedient to make." "I fret about nothing on earth except papa's illness," answered my companion. "I care for nothing in comparison with papa; and I'll never, never, oh, never, while I have my senses, do an act or say a word to vex him. I love him better than myself, Ellen; and I know it by this: I pray every night that I may live after him, because I would rather be miserable than that he should be. That proves I love him better than myself." "Good words," I replied, "but deeds must prove it also; and after he is well, remember you don't forget resolutions formed in the hour of fear." As we talked, we neared a door that opened on the road, and my young lady, lightening into sunshine again, climbed up and seated herself on the top of the wall, reaching over to gather some hips that bloomed scarlet on the summit branches of the wild rose trees shadowing the highway side. The lower fruit had disappeared, but only birds could touch the upper, except from Cathy's present station. In stretching to pull them, her hat fell off, and as the door was locked, she proposed scrambling down to recover it. I bid her be cautious lest she got a fall, and she nimbly disappeared. But the return was no such easy matter. The stones were smooth and neatly cemented, and the rose bushes and blackberry stragglers could yield no assistance in reascending. I, like a fool, didn't recollect that, till I heard her laughing and exclaiming, "Ellen, you'll have to fetch the key, or else I must run round to the porter's lodge. I can't scale the ramparts on this side." "Stay where you are," I answered. "I have my bundle of keys in my pocket. Perhaps I may manage to open it. If not, I'll go." Catherine amused herself with dancing to and fro before the door, while I tried all the large keys in succession. I had applied the last, and found that none would do; so, repeating my desire that she would remain there, I was about to hurry home as fast as I could, when an approaching sound arrested me. It was the trot of a horse. Cathy's dance stopped also. "Who is that?" I whispered. "Ellen, I wish you could open the door," whispered back my companion anxiously.
"Oh, Miss Linton!"
cried a deep voice, the rider's.
"I'm glad to meet you. Don't be in haste to enter, for I have an explanation to ask and obtain."
"I shan't speak to you, Mr. Heathcliff," answered Catherine. "Papa says you are a wicked man, and you hate both him and me, and Ellen says the same."
"That is nothing to the purpose," said Heathcliff. He it was. "I don't hate my son, I suppose, and it is concerning him that I demand your attention. Yes, you have cause to blush. 2 or 3 months since, were you not in the habit of writing to Linton? Making love in play, eh? You deserved, both of you, flogging for that: you especially the elder, and less sensitive, as it turns out. I've got your letters, and if you give me any pertness, I'll send them to your father. I presume you grew weary of the amusement and dropped it, didn't you? Well, you dropped Linton with it into a slough of despond. He was in earnest, in love really. As true as I live, he's dying for you, breaking his heart at your fickleness, not figuratively, but actually. Though Hareton has made him a standing jest for 6 weeks, and I have used more serious measures, and attempted to frighten him out of his idiocy, he gets worse daily, and he'll be under the sod before summer, unless you restore him."
"How can you lie so glaringly to the poor child?" I called from the inside. "Pray ride on. How can you deliberately get up such paltry falsehoods? Miss Cathy, I'll knock the lock off with a stone. You won't believe that vile nonsense. You can feel in yourself it is impossible that a person should die for love of a stranger."
"I was not aware there were eavesdroppers,"
muttered the detected villain.
"Worthy Mrs. Dean, I like you, but I don't like your double-dealing," he added aloud. "How could you lie so glaringly as to affirm I hated the poor child, and invent bugbear stories to terrify her from my door-stones? Catherine Linton! The very name warms me. My bonny lass, I shall be from home all this week. Go and see if I've not spoken truth. Do, there's a darling. Just imagine your father in my place, and Linton in yours. Then think how you would value your careless lover if he refused to stir a step to comfort you when your father himself entreated him. And don't, from pure stupidity, fall into the same error. I swear on my salvation he's going to his grave, and none but you can save him."
The lock gave way, and I issued out.
"I swear Linton is dying,
Repeated Heathcliff, looking hard at me.
and grief and disappointment are hastening his death. Nelly, if you won't let her go, you can walk over yourself; but I shall not return till this time next week, and I think your master himself would scarcely object to her visiting her cousin."
"Come in," said I, taking Cathy by the arm, and half forcing her to re-enter; for she lingered, viewing with troubled eyes the features of the speaker, too stern to express his inward deceit. He pushed his horse close, and bending down, observed,
"Miss Catherine, I'll own to you that I've little patience with Linton, and Hareton and Joseph have less. I'll own that he's with a harsh set. He pines for kindness as well as love, and a kind word from you would be his best medicine. Don't mind Mrs. Dean's cruel cautions, but be generous and contrive to see him. He dreams of you day and night, and cannot be persuaded that you don't hate him, since you neither write nor call."
I closed the door, and rolled a stone to assist the loosened lock in holding it; and spreading my umbrella, I drew my charge underneath, for the rain began to drive through the moaning branches of the trees, and warned us to avoid delay. Our hurry prevented any comment on the encounter with Heathcliff, as we stretched towards home; but I divined instinctively that Catherine's heart was clouded now in double darkness. Her features were so sad they did not seem hers. She evidently regarded what she had heard as every syllable true. The master had retired to rest before we came in. Cathy stole to his room to inquire how he was. He had fallen asleep. She returned and asked me to sit with her in the library. We took our tea together, and afterwards she lay down on the rug, and told me not to talk, for she was weary. I got a book and pretended to read. As soon as she supposed me absorbed in my occupation, she recommenced her silent weeping. It appeared at present her favourite diversion. I suffered her to enjoy it a while, then I expostulated, deriding and ridiculing all Mr. Heathcliff's assertions about his son, as if I were certain she would coincide. Alas, I hadn't skill to counteract the effect his account had produced. It was just what he intended. "You may be right, Ellen," she answered, "but I shall never feel at ease till I know. And I must tell Linton it is not my fault that I don't write, and convince him that I shall not change." What use were anger and protestations against her silly credulity? We parted that night hostile, but next day beheld me on the road to Wuthering Heights, by the side of my wilful young mistress's pony. I couldn't bear to witness her sorrow, to see her pale, dejected countenance and heavy eyes; and I yielded, in the faint hope that Linton himself might prove, by his reception of us, how little of the tale was founded on fact. Chapter 22. Chapter 23. The rainy night had ushered in a misty morning, half frost, half drizzle, and temporary brooks crossed our path, gurgling from the uplands. My feet were thoroughly wetted, I was cross and low, exactly the humour suited for making the most of these disagreeable things. We entered the farmhouse by the kitchen way, to ascertain whether Mr. Heathcliff were really absent, because I put slight faith in his own affirmation. Joseph seemed sitting in a sort of Elysium, alone, beside a roaring fire, a quart of ale on the table near him, bristling with large pieces of toasted oatcake, and his black short pipe in his mouth. Catherine ran to the hearth to warm herself. I asked if the master was in. My question remained so long unanswered that I thought the old man had grown deaf, and repeated it louder. "Nay," he snarled, or rather screamed through his nose. "Nay, you mun go back where you come from." "Joseph!" cried a peevish voice, simultaneously with me, from the inner room. "How often am I to call you? There are only a few red ashes now. Joseph, come this moment!" Vigorous puffs and a resolute stare into the grate declared he had no ear for this appeal. The housekeeper and Hareton were invisible, one gone on an errand, and the other at his work, probably. We knew Linton's tones, and entered. "Oh, I hope you'll die in a garret, starved to death!" said the boy, mistaking our approach for that of his negligent attendant. He stopped on observing his error. His cousin flew to him. "Is that you, Miss Linton?" he said, raising his head from the arm of the great chair in which he reclined. "No, don't kiss me: it takes my breath. Dear me! Papa said you would call," continued he, after recovering a little from Catherine's embrace, while she stood by looking very contrite. "Will you shut the door, if you please? You left it open, and those detestable creatures won't bring coals to the fire. It's so cold." I stirred up the cinders and fetched a scuttleful myself. The invalid complained of being covered with ashes, but he had a tiresome cough, and looked feverish and ill, so I did not rebuke his temper. "Well, Linton," murmured Catherine, when his corrugated brow relaxed, "are you glad to see me? Can I do you any good?" "Why didn't you come before?" he asked. "You should have come instead of writing. It tired me dreadfully, writing those long letters. I'd far rather have talked to you. Now I can neither bear to talk nor anything else. I wonder where Zillah is. Will you," looking at me, "step into the kitchen and see?" I had received no thanks for my other service, and being unwilling to run to and fro at his behest, I replied, "Nobody is out there but Joseph." "I want to drink!" he exclaimed, fretfully, turning away. "Zillah is constantly gadding off to Gimmerton since papa went. It's miserable. And I'm obliged to come down here. They resolved never to hear me upstairs." "Is your father attentive to you, Master Heathcliff?" I asked, perceiving Catherine to be checked in her friendly advances. "Attentive! He makes them a little more attentive, at least," he cried. "The wretches! Do you know, Miss Linton, that brute Hareton laughs at me. I hate him: indeed, I hate them all. They are odious beings." Cathy began searching for some water. She lighted on a pitcher in the dresser, filled a tumbler, and brought it. He bid her add a spoonful of wine from a bottle on the table, and having swallowed a small portion, appeared more tranquil, and said she was very kind. "And are you glad to see me?" asked she, reiterating her former question, and pleased to detect the faint dawn of a smile. "Yes, I am. It's something new to hear a voice like yours," he replied. "But I have been vexed because you wouldn't come, and papa swore it was owing to me. He called me a pitiful, shuffling, worthless thing, and said you despised me. And if he had been in my place,
He would be more the master of the Grange than your father by this time. But you don't despise me, do you, Miss—"
"I wish you would say Catherine or Cathy," interrupted my young lady. "Despise you? No! Next to papa and Ellen, I love you better than anybody living. I don't love Mr. Heathcliff, though, and I dare not come when he returns. Will he stay away many days?"
"Not many," answered Linton; "but he goes on to the moors frequently since the shooting season commenced, and you might spend an hour or two with me in his absence. Do say you will. I think I should not be peevish with you. You'd not provoke me, and you'd always be ready to help me, wouldn't you?"
"Yes," said Catherine, stroking his long soft hair. "If I could only get papa's consent, I'd spend half my time with you. Pretty Linton! I wish you were my brother."
"And then you would like me as well as your father," observed he, more cheerfully. "But papa says you would love me better than him and all the world if you were my wife; so I'd rather you were that."
"No, I should never love anybody better than papa," she returned gravely. "And people hate their wives sometimes, but not their sisters and brothers. And if you were the latter, you would live with us, and papa would be as fond of you as he is of me." Linton denied that people ever hated their wives, but Cathy affirmed they did, and in her wisdom instanced his own father's aversion to her aunt. I endeavoured to stop her thoughtless tongue. I couldn't succeed till everything she knew was out. Master Heathcliff, much irritated, asserted her relation was false. "Papa told me, and papa does not tell falsehoods," she answered pertly.
"My papa scorns yours," cried Linton. "He calls him a sneaking fool."
"Yours is a wicked man," retorted Catherine; "and you are very naughty to dare to repeat what he says. He must be wicked to have made Aunt Isabella leave him as she did."
"She didn't leave him," said the boy. "You shan't contradict me."
"She did!" cried my young lady.
"Well, I'll tell you something," said Linton. "Your mother hated your father. Now then—"
"Oh!"
exclaimed Catherine, too enraged to continue. "And she loved mine," added he.
"You little liar! I hate you now!"
she panted, and her face grew red with passion. "She did! She did!" sang Linton, sinking into the recess of his chair, and leaning back his head to enjoy the agitation of the other disputant, who stood behind. "Hush, Master Heathcliff!" I said. "That's your father's tale, too, I suppose." "It isn't. You hold your tongue," he answered. "She did, Catherine! She did, she did!" Cathy, beside herself, gave the chair a violent push, and caused him to fall against one arm. He was immediately seized by a suffocating cough that soon ended his triumph. It lasted so long that it frightened even me. As to his cousin, she wept with all her might, aghast at the mischief she had done, though she said nothing. I held him till the fit exhausted itself. Then he thrust me away, and leant his head down silently. Catherine quelled her lamentations also, took a seat opposite, and looked solemnly into the fire. "How do you feel now, Master Heathcliff?" I inquired, after waiting 10 minutes. "I wish she felt as I do," he replied. "Spiteful, cruel thing! Hareton never touches me: he never struck me in his life; and I was better to–day, and there—" His voice died in a whimper.
"I didn't strike you," muttered Cathy, chewing her lip to prevent another burst of emotion. He sighed and moaned like one under great suffering, and kept it up for a quarter of an hour, on purpose to distress his cousin, apparently, for whenever he caught a stifled sob from her, he put renewed pain and pathos into the inflections of his voice. "I'm sorry I hurt you, Linton," she said at length, racked beyond endurance. "But I couldn't have been hurt by that little push, and I had no idea that you could either. You're not much, are you, Linton? Don't let me go home thinking I've done you harm. Answer! Speak to me."
"I can't speak to you," he murmured. "You've hurt me so that I shall lie awake all night, choking with this cough. If you had it, you'd know what it was. But you'll be comfortably asleep while I'm in agony and nobody near me. I wonder how you would like to pass those fearful nights."
And he began to wail aloud for very pity of himself. "Since you are in the habit of passing dreadful nights," I said, "it won't be Miss who spoils your ease. You'd be the same had she never come. However, she shall not disturb you again, and perhaps you'll get quieter when we leave you." "Must I go?" asked Catherine dolefully, bending over him. "Do you want me to go, Linton?"
"You can't alter what you've done,"
he replied pettishly, shrinking from her.
"unless you alter it for the worse by teasing me into a fever."
"Well, then, I must go," she repeated.
"Let me alone, at least,"
said he.
"I can't bear your talking."
She lingered, and resisted my persuasions to departure a tiresome while; but as he neither looked up nor spoke, she finally made a movement to the door, and I followed. We were recalled by a scream. Linton had slid from his seat on to the hearthstone, and lay writhing in the mere perverseness of an indulged plague of a child, determined to be as grievous and harassing as it can. I thoroughly gauged his disposition from his behaviour, and saw at once it would be folly to attempt humouring him. Not so my companion: she ran back in terror, knelt down and cried, and soothed and entreated, till he grew quiet from lack of breath; by no means from compunction at distressing her. "I shall lift him on to the settle," I said, "and he may roll about as he pleases. We can't stop to watch him. I hope you are satisfied, Miss Cathy, that you are not the person to benefit him, and that his condition of health is not occasioned by attachment to you. Now then, there he is. Come away. As soon as he knows there is nobody by to care for his nonsense, he'll be glad to lie still." She placed a cushion under his head, and offered him some water. He rejected the latter, and tossed uneasily on the former, as if it were a stone or a block of wood. She tried to put it more comfortably.
"I can't do with that,"
he said.
"It's not high enough."
Catherine brought another to lay above it.
"That's too high,"
murmured the provoking thing.
"How must I arrange it, then?"
she asked despairingly. He twined himself up to her as she half knelt by the settle, and converted her shoulder into a support. "No, that won't do," I said. "You'll be content with the cushion, Master Heathcliff. Miss has wasted too much time on you already. We cannot remain 5 minutes longer."
"Yes, yes, we can," replied Cathy. "He's good and patient now. He's beginning to think I shall have far greater misery than he will to-night, if I believe he is the worse for my visit. And then I dare not come again. Tell the truth about it, Linton, for I mustn't come if I have hurt you."
"You must come to cure me," he answered.
You ought to come, because you have hurt me. You know you have extremely. I was not as ill when you entered as I am at present, was I?" "But you've made yourself ill by crying and being in a passion. I didn't do it all," said his cousin. "However, we'll be friends now. And you want me? You would wish to see me sometimes, really?" "I told you I did," he replied impatiently. "Sit on the settle and let me lean on your knee. That's as mamma used to do, whole afternoons together. Sit quite still and don't talk. But you may sing a song, if you can sing. Or you may say a nice long interesting ballad. One of those you promised to teach me, or a story. I'd rather have a ballad, though. Begin."
Catherine repeated the longest she could remember. The employment pleased both mightily. Linton would have another, and after that another, notwithstanding my strenuous objections; and so they went on until the clock struck 12, and we heard Hareton in the court returning for his dinner.
"And to-morrow, Catherine? Will you be here to-morrow?"
asked young Heathcliff, holding her frock as she rose reluctantly. "No," I answered, "nor next day neither." She, however, gave a different response, evidently, for his forehead cleared as she stooped and whispered in his ear. "You won't go to-morrow, recollect, miss," I commenced, when we were out of the house. "You are not dreaming of it, are you?" She smiled. "Oh, I'll take good care," I continued. "I'll have that lock mended, and you can escape by no way else."
"I can get over the wall," she said, laughing. "The Grange is not a prison, Ellen, and you are not my gaoler. And besides, I'm almost 17: I'm a woman; and I'm certain Linton would recover quickly, if he had me to look after him. I'm older than he is, you know, and wiser: less childish, am I not? And he'll soon do as I direct him, with some slight coaxing. He's a pretty little darling when he's good. I'd make such a pet of him if he were mine. We should never quarrel, should we, after we were used to each other? Don't you like him, Ellen?"
"Like him!" I exclaimed. "The worst-tempered bit of a sickly slip that ever struggled into its teens. Happily, as Mr. Heathcliff conjectured, he'll not win 20. I doubt whether he'll see spring, indeed; and small loss to his family whenever he drops off. And lucky it is for us that his father took him: the kinder he was treated, the more tedious and selfish he'd be. I'm glad you have no chance of having him for a husband, Miss Catherine." My companion waxed serious at hearing this speech. To speak of his death so regardlessly wounded her feelings.
"He's younger than I," she answered, after a protracted pause of meditation. "And he ought to live the longest. He will: he must live as long as I do. He's as strong now as when he first came into the north, I'm positive of that. It's only a cold that ails him, the same as papa has. You say papa will get better, and why shouldn't he?"
"Well, well!" I cried. "After all, we needn't trouble ourselves. For listen, miss, and mind I'll keep my word. If you attempt going to Wuthering Heights again, with or without me, I shall inform Mr. Linton; and, unless he allow it, the intimacy with your cousin must not be revived."
"It has been revived," muttered Cathy, sulkily.
"Must not be continued, then," I said.
"We'll see,"
was her reply, and she set off at a gallop, leaving me to toil in the rear. We both reached home before our dinner time. My master supposed we had been wandering through the park, and therefore he demanded no explanation of our absence. As soon as I entered, I hastened to change my soaked shoes and stockings, but sitting such a while at the Heights had done the mischief. On the succeeding morning I was laid up, and during 3 weeks I remained incapacitated for attending to my duties, a calamity never experienced prior to that period, and never, I am thankful to say, since. My little mistress behaved like an angel in coming to wait on me and cheer my solitude. The confinement brought me exceedingly low. It is wearisome to a stirring, active body, but few have slighter reasons for complaint than I had. The moment Catherine left Mr. Linton's room, she appeared at my bedside. Her day was divided between us. No amusement usurped a minute. She neglected her meals, her studies, and her play, and she was the fondest nurse that ever watched. She must have had a warm heart, when she loved her father so, to give so much to me. I said her days were divided between us, but the master retired early, and I generally needed nothing after 6 o'clock. Thus the evening was her own. Poor thing! I never considered what she did with herself after tea; and though frequently, when she looked in to bid me good night, I remarked a fresh colour in her cheeks, and a pinkness over her slender fingers, instead of fancying the line borrowed from a cold ride across the moors, I laid it to the charge of a hot fire in the library. Chapter 23. Chapter 24. At the close of 3 weeks I was able to quit my chamber and move about the house; and on the first occasion of my sitting up in the evening, I asked Catherine to read to me, because my eyes were weak. We were in the library, the master having gone to bed. She consented, rather unwillingly, I fancied; and imagining my sort of books did not suit her, I bid her please herself in the choice of what she perused. She selected one of her own favourites, and got forward steadily about an hour. Then came frequent questions.
Ellen, are not you tired? Hadn't you better lie down now? You'll be sick keeping up so long, Ellen.
No, no, dear, I'm not tired, I returned continually. Perceiving me immovable, she essayed another method of showing her disrelish for her occupation. It changed to yawning and stretching and—
Ellen, I am tired.
"Give over, then, and talk," I answered. That was worse. She fretted and sighed, and looked at her watch till 8, and finally went to her room completely overdone with sleep, judging by her peevish, heavy look, and the constant rubbing she inflicted on her eyes. The following night she seemed more impatient still, and on the 3rd from recovering my company she complained of a headache, and left me. I thought her conduct odd, and having remained alone a long while, I resolved on going and inquiring whether she were better, and asking her to come and lie on the sofa, instead of upstairs in the dark. No Catherine could I discover upstairs, and none below. The servants affirmed they had not seen her. I listened at Mr. Edgar's door: all was silence. I returned to her apartment, extinguished my candle, and seated myself in the window. The moon shone bright, a sprinkling of snow covered the ground, and I reflected that she might possibly have taken it into her head to walk about the garden for refreshment. I did detect a figure creeping along the inner fence of the park, but it was not my young mistress. On its emerging into the light, I recognised one of the grooms. He stood a considerable period, viewing the carriage road through the grounds; then started off at a brisk pace, as if he had detected something, and reappeared presently, leading Mrs. Pony. And there she was, just dismounted and walking by its side. The man took his charge stealthily across the grass towards the stable. Cathy entered by the casement window of the drawing-room, and glided noiselessly up to where I awaited her. She put the door gently to, slipped off her snowy shoes, untied her hat, and was proceeding, unconscious of my espionage, to lay aside her mantle, when I suddenly rose and revealed myself. The surprise petrified her an instant: she uttered an inarticulate exclamation, and stood fixed. "My dear Miss Catherine," I began, too vividly impressed by her recent kindness to break into a scold, "where have you been riding out at this hour? And why should you try to deceive me by telling a tale? Where have you been? Speak!"
To the bottom of the park,"
she stammered.
"I didn't tell a tale."
"And nowhere else?" I demanded.
"No,"
was the muttered reply.
"Oh, Catherine!" I cried sorrowfully. "You know you have been doing wrong, or you wouldn't be driven to uttering an untruth to me. That does grieve me. I'd rather be 3 months ill than hear you frame a deliberate lie." She sprang forward, and bursting into tears, threw her arms round my neck. "Well, Ellen, I'm so afraid of you being angry," she said. "Promise not to be angry, and you shall know the very truth. I hate to hide it."
We sat down in the window-seat. I assured her I would not scold, whatever her secret might be, and I guessed it, of course. So she commenced—
"I've been to Wuthering Heights, Ellen, and I've never missed going a day since you fell ill, except thrice before, and twice after you left your room. I gave Michael books and pictures to prepare Minnie every evening, and to put her back in the stable. You mustn't scold him either, mind. I was at the Heights by 6:30, and generally stayed till 8:30, and then galloped home. It was not to amuse myself that I went: I was often wretched all the time. Now and then I was happy, once in a week, perhaps. At first, I expected there would be sad work persuading you to let me keep my word to Linton; for I had engaged to call again next day when we quitted him; but, as you stayed upstairs on the morrow, I escaped that trouble. While Michael was refastening the lock of the park door in the afternoon, I got possession of the key, and told him how my cousin wished me to visit him, because he was sick and couldn't come to the Grange; and how papa would object to my going. And then I negotiated with him about the pony. He is fond of reading, and he thinks of leaving soon to get married; so he offered, if I would lend him books out of the library, to do what I wished. But I preferred giving him my own, and that satisfied him better. On my second visit Linton seemed in lively spirits; and Zillah, that is their housekeeper, made us a clean room and a good fire, and told us that, as Joseph was out at a prayer meeting, and Hareton Earnshaw was off with his dogs, robbing our woods of pheasants, as I heard afterwards, we might do what we liked. She brought me some warm wine and gingerbread, and appeared exceedingly good-natured, and Linton sat in the arm-chair, and I in the little rocking-chair on the hearthstone, and we laughed and talked so merrily, and found so much to say. We planned where we would go, and what we would do in summer. I needn't repeat that, because you would call it silly. One time, however, we were near quarrelling. He said the pleasantest manner of spending a hot July day was lying from morning till evening on a bank of heath in the middle of the moors, with the bees humming dreamily about among the bloom, and the larks singing high up overhead, and the blue sky and bright sun shining steadily and cloudlessly. That was his most perfect idea of heaven's happiness. Mine was rocking in a rustling green tree, with a west wind blowing, and bright white clouds flitting rapidly above; and not only larks, but throstles and blackbirds and linnets and cuckoos pouring out music on every side, and the moors seen at a distance, broken into cool dusky dells, but close by great swells of long grass undulating in waves to the breeze, and woods and sounding water, and the whole world awake and wild with joy. He wanted all to lie in an ecstasy of peace. I wanted all to sparkle and dance in a glorious jubilee. I said his heaven would be only half alive, and he said mine would be drunk. I said I should fall asleep in his, and he said he could not breathe in mine, and began to grow very snappish. At last we agreed to try both, as soon as the right weather came, and then we kissed each other and were friends. After sitting still an hour, I looked at the great room with its smooth, uncarpeted floor, and thought how nice it would be to play in if we removed the table; and I asked Linton to call Zillah in to help us, and we'd have a game at blind man's buff. She should try to catch us. You used to, you know, Ellen. He wouldn't. There was no pleasure in it, he said. But he consented to play at ball with me. We found two in a cupboard, among a heap of old toys, tops and hoops and battledores and shuttlecocks. One was marked C and the other H. I wished to have the C because that stood for Catherine, and the H might be for Heathcliff, his name. But the bran came out of H, and Linton didn't like it. I beat him constantly, and he got cross again, and coughed, and returned to his chair. That night, though, he easily recovered his good humour. He was charmed with 2 or 3 pretty songs, your songs, Ellen; and when I was obliged to go, he begged and entreated me to come the following evening, and I promised. Minnie and I went flying home as light as air, and I dreamt of Wuthering Heights and my sweet darling cousin till morning. On the morrow I was sad, partly because you were poorly, and partly that I wished my father knew and approved of my excursions. But it was beautiful moonlight after tea, and as I rode on the gloom cleared. I shall have another happy evening, I thought to myself; and what delights me more, my pretty Linton will. I trotted up their garden, and was turning round to the back, when that fellow Earnshaw met me, took my bridle, and bid me go in by the front entrance. He patted Minnie's neck, and said she was a bonny beast, and appeared as if he wanted me to speak to him. I only told him to leave my horse alone, or else it would kick him. He answered, in his vulgar accent,
"It wouldn't do much hurt if it did,"
and surveyed its legs with a smile. I was half inclined to make it try. However, he moved off to open the door, and as he raised the latch, he looked up to the inscription above, and said, with a stupid mixture of awkwardness and elation,
"Miss Catherine, I can read yon now."
"Wonderful!" I exclaimed. "Pray let us hear you. You are grown clever." He spelt and drawled over by syllables the name Hareton Earnshaw. "And the figures?" I cried encouragingly, perceiving that he came to a dead halt.
"I cannot tell them yet,"
he answered. "Oh, you dunce!" I said, laughing heartily at his failure. The fool stared, with a grin hovering about his lips, and a scowl gathering over his eyes, as if uncertain whether he might not join in my mirth. whether it were not pleasant familiarity, or, what it really was, contempt. I settled his doubts by suddenly retrieving my gravity, and desiring him to walk away, for I came to see Linton, not him. He reddened, I saw that by the moonlight, dropped his hand from the latch, and skulked off, a picture of mortified vanity. He imagined himself to be as accomplished as Linton, I suppose, because he could spell his own name, and was marvellously discomfited that I didn't think the same.
"Stop, Miss Catherine, dear," I interrupted. "I shall not scold, but I don't like your conduct there. If you had remembered that Hareton was your cousin as much as Master Heathcliff, you would have felt how improper it was to behave in that way. At least it was praiseworthy ambition for him to desire to be as accomplished as Linton; and probably he did not learn merely to show off. You had made him ashamed of his ignorance before, I have no doubt, and he wished to remedy it and please you. To sneer at his imperfect attempt was very bad breeding. Had you been brought up in his circumstances, would you be less rude? He was as quick and as intelligent a child as ever you were, and I'm hurt that he should be despised now, because that base Heathcliff has treated him so unjustly."
"Well, Ellen, you won't cry about it, will you?"
she exclaimed, surprised at my earnestness.
"But wait, and you shall hear if he conned his ABC to please me, and if it were worth while being civil to the brute." I entered. Linton was lying on the settle, and half got up to welcome me.
"I'm ill to-night, Catherine, love,"
he said,
"and you must have all the talk, and let me listen. Come and sit by me. I was sure you wouldn't break your word, and I'll make you promise again, before you go."
I knew now that I mustn't tease him as he was ill, and I spoke softly and put no questions, and avoided irritating him in any way. I had brought some of my nicest books for him. He asked me to read a little of one, and I was about to comply, when Earnshaw burst the door open, having gathered venom with reflection. He advanced direct to us, seized Linton by the arm, and swung him off the seat.
"Get to thy own room,"
he said, in a voice almost inarticulate with passion, and his face looked swelled and furious.
"Take her there if she comes to see thee. Thou shan't keep me out of this. Begone with you both."
He swore at us, and left Linton no time to answer, nearly throwing him into the kitchen; and he clenched his fist as I followed, seemingly longing to knock me down. I was afraid for a moment, and I let one volume fall. He kicked it after me, and shut us out. I heard a malignant, crackly laugh by the fire, and turning, beheld that odious Joseph standing rubbing his bony hands and quivering.
"I was sure he'd sarve you out. He's a grand lad. He's getting a great spirit in him. He knows, he knows as well as I do. Who should beat Maister yonder? Eh, eh, eh! He made ye skiff properly. Eh, eh, eh!"
"Where must we go?" I asked of my cousin, disregarding the old wretch's mockery. Linton was white and trembling. He was not pretty then, Ellen. Oh, no! He looked frightful, for his thin face and large eyes were wrought into an expression of frantic, powerless fury. He grasped the handle of the door and shook it. It was fastened inside.
"If you don't let me in, I'll kill you! If you don't let me in, I'll kill you!"
He rather shrieked than said.
"Devil, devil! I'll kill you! I'll kill you!"
Joseph uttered his croaking laugh again.
"There, that's father!"
he cried.
"That's father, with allus summat o' either side in us.
Niver heed Hareton, lad: dunnut be feared he cannot get at thee.
I took hold of Linton's hands and tried to pull him away, but he shrieked so shockingly that I dared not proceed. At last his cries were choked by a dreadful fit of coughing. Blood gushed from his mouth, and he fell on the ground. I ran into the yard, sick with terror, and called for Zillah as loud as I could. She soon heard me: she was milking the cows in a shed behind the barn, and hurrying from her work, she inquired what there was to do. I hadn't breath to explain. Dragging her in, I looked about for Linton. Earnshaw had come out to examine the mischief he had caused, and he was then conveying the poor thing upstairs. Zillah and I ascended after him, but he stopped me at the top of the steps, and said I shouldn't go in: I must go home. I exclaimed that he had killed Linton, and I would enter. Joseph locked the door, and declared I should do no sich stuff, and asked me whether I were bound to be as mad as him. I stood crying till the housekeeper reappeared. She affirmed he would be better in a bit, but he couldn't do with that shrieking and din, and she took me and nearly carried me into the house. Ellen, I was ready to tear my hair off my head. I sobbed and wept so that my eyes were almost blind, and the ruffian you have such sympathy with stood opposite, presuming every now and then to bid me whisht, and denying that it was his fault; and finally, frightened by my assertions that I would tell papa, and that he would be put in prison and hanged, he commenced blubbering himself, and hurried out to hide his cowardly agitation. Still I was not rid of him. When at length they compelled me to depart, and I had got some 100 yards off the premises, he suddenly issued from the shadow of the roadside, and checked Minnie, and took hold of me.
"Miss Catherine, I'm ill grieved,
He began.
but it's rayther too bad."
I gave him a cut with my whip, thinking perhaps he would murder me. He let go, thundering one of his horrid curses, and I galloped home more than half out of my senses. I didn't bid you good night that evening, and I didn't go to Wuthering Heights the next. I wished to go exceedingly, but I was strangely excited, and dreaded to hear that Linton was dead sometimes, and sometimes shuddered at the thought of encountering Hareton. On the third day I took courage: at least I couldn't bear longer suspense, and stole off once more. I went at 5 o'clock and walked, fancying I might manage to creep into the house, and up to Linton's room, unobserved. However, the dogs gave notice of my approach. Zillah received me, and, saying the lad was mending nicely, showed me into a small, tidy, carpeted apartment, where, to my inexpressible joy, I beheld Linton laid on a little sofa, reading one of my books. But he would neither speak to me nor look at me through a whole hour, Ellen. He has such an unhappy temper. And what quite confounded me, when he did open his mouth, it was to utter the falsehood that I had occasioned the uproar, and Hareton was not to blame. Unable to reply, except passionately, I got up and walked from the room. He sent after me a faint "Catherine." He did not reckon on being answered so; but I wouldn't turn back, and the morrow was the second day on which I stayed at home, nearly determined to visit him no more. But it was so miserable going to bed and getting up, and never hearing anything about him, that my resolution melted into air before it was properly formed. It had appeared wrong to take the journey once: now it seemed wrong to refrain. Michael came to ask if he must saddle Minnie. I said yes, and considered myself doing a duty as she bore me over the hills. I was forced to pass the front windows to get to the court: it was no use trying to conceal my presence. "Young master is in the house," said Zillah, as she saw me making for the parlour. I went in. Earnshaw was there also, but he quitted the room directly. Linton sat in the great armchair, half asleep. Walking up to the fire, I began in a serious tone, partly meaning it to be true. "As you don't like me, Linton, and as you think I come on purpose to hurt you, and pretend that I do so every time, this is our last meeting. Let us say good–bye, and tell Mr. Heathcliff that you have no wish to see me, and that he mustn't invent any more falsehoods on the subject." "Sit down and take your hat off, Catherine," he answered. "You are so much happier than I am, you ought to be better. Papa talks enough of my defects, and shows enough scorn of me, to make it natural I should doubt myself. I doubt whether I am not altogether as worthless as he calls me, frequently; and then I feel so cross and bitter, I hate everybody. I am worthless and bad in temper, and bad in spirit, almost always. And, if you choose, you may say good–bye. You'll get rid of an annoyance. Only, Catherine, do me this justice. Believe that if I might be as sweet and as kind and as good as you are, I would be, as willingly and more so than as happy and as healthy. And believe that your kindness has made me love you deeper than if I deserved your love. And though I couldn't and cannot help showing my nature to you, I regret it and repent it, and shall regret and repent it till I die." I felt he spoke the truth, and I felt I must forgive him; and though we should quarrel the next moment, I must forgive him again. We were reconciled, but we cried, both of us, the whole time I stayed. Not entirely for sorrow, yet I was sorry Linton had that distorted nature. He'll never let his friends be at ease, and he'll never be at ease himself. I have always gone to his little parlour since that night, because his father returned the day after. About 3 times, I think, we have been merry and hopeful, as we were the first evening. The rest of my visits were dreary and troubled, now with his selfishness and spite, and now with his sufferings; but I've learned to endure the former with nearly as little resentment as the latter. Mr. Heathcliff purposely avoids me. I have hardly seen him at all. Last Sunday, indeed, coming earlier than usual, I heard him abusing poor Linton cruelly for his conduct of the night before. I can't tell how he knew of it unless he listened. Linton had certainly behaved provokingly. However, it was the business of nobody but me, and I interrupted Mr. Heathcliff's lecture by entering and telling him so. He burst into a laugh and went away, saying he was glad I took that view of the matter. Since then I've told Linton he must whisper his bitter things. Now, Ellen, you have heard all. I can't be prevented from going to Wuthering Heights, except by inflicting misery on 2 people; whereas, if you'll only not tell papa, my going need disturb the tranquillity of none. You'll not tell, will you? It will be very heartless if you do."
"I'll make up my mind on that point by to–morrow, Miss Catherine," I replied. "It requires some study, and so I'll leave you to your rest, and go think it over." I thought it over aloud in my master's presence, walking straight from her room to his, and relating the whole story, with the exception of her conversations with her cousin, and any mention of Hareton. Mr. Linton was alarmed and distressed more than he would acknowledge to me. In the morning, Catherine learned my betrayal of her confidence, and she learned also that her secret visits were to end. In vain she wept and writhed against the interdict. and implored her father to have pity on Linton. All she got to comfort her was a promise that he would write, and give him leave to come to the Grange when he pleased; but explaining that he must no longer expect to see Catherine at Wuthering Heights. Perhaps, had he been aware of his nephew's disposition and state of health, he would have seen fit to withhold even that slight consolation. Chapter 25.